here. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I want to say a special thank you to Pedro Antonio for inviting me. We've gotten to know each other through the work I'll talk about today with a focus on responsible investing, and I'm really grateful for the invitation. Since we're in the building, I want to say thank you to Secretary General Guterres, whose powerful speech on climate action in June I was honored to attend under the whale at the American Museum of Natural History. I hope everyone has been there, and he gave a very powerful speech about the necessity of stepping up our work on climate action. And I feel grateful that we're so aligned with the UN Joint Staff Pension Fund in an approach to responsible investing that insists that our fiduciary duty, and I'll talk about this, but especially as a universal and perpetual investor, demands an approach that is bold and ambitious on making the climate transition and also making sure that economic prosperity is far more shared and sustainable than it is today. Because I'm in a room with a lot of other CFOs, I will take just one step back and say, managing the pension funds for the 5 New York City pension funds, that is the retirement security of 750,000 current and retired public school teachers and firefighters and police officers and public hospital nurses, is the sort of the most sacred responsibility of the office. But we also play the critical CFO function for the city as a whole. So I have a whole team every year that just does the annual comprehensive financial report, New York City's audit. And when we publish the audit every year, it's not like there's great fanfare, and yet it's because we put out a reliable set of numbers that say, here's what we owe, and here's who owes us, and here's how much money we have in the bank, and here's how much income came in, and here's the expenses. You can count on the city to make good on its obligations and in its relationships. It really is that work that I view as foundational, not just to our pension fund work, not just to our financial work, but to our governing work. Because if we're going to show that this is a small d democratic city that represents the interests of New Yorkers and can deliver for them, then people have to believe us, and that starts from providing good financial numbers every year. So thank you for the work. It's good to be in a room with other CFOs, even if honestly you're actually a lot more qualified for that job than I am. They wouldn't let me do the audit. So what I want to talk about today, in the spirit that I mentioned, is the work we have to do around responsible investing, or what is sometimes called ESG, environmental, social, and governance concerns, as we pay attention to our investments. In particular because we're facing two pretty grim realities. First, despite a lot of effort to date, we are not on the path to achieve the necessary targets of the Paris Accords. We are on path to blow past 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, and maybe much more than that for all the efforts. So it is time to face that honestly and redouble our efforts. Unfortunately, at the same time, here in the United States, we face this significant distraction of a disingenuous, politically motivated attack on ESG or responsible investing. And in just the recent example of this sort of right-wing fear-mongering, just a couple weeks ago, my office received a demand letter from Congress members Jim Jordan and Thomas Massey that was sent to me and to many other fiduciaries. Perhaps some of you in the room also got such a letter from our congressional investigators. And I just want to be clear what I think about it, what these MAGA GOP leaders have tried to frame as congressional oversight is really, in my opinion, just a thinly disguised faux populist witch hunt at the behest of their fossil fuel donors. And it's more than that, it's more than congressional hearings. There are red state treasurers who are leading legal efforts to boycott fund managers who engage in ESG or responsible investing. And that may well be illegal. There's substantial litigation against it in US states around the country. But unfortunately, it is having a significant impact, even though we can see with our own eyes the impacts of climate change, including increasingly deadly heat waves all across the planet, and hurricane season that's both longer and more intense, even though we can see that just over the last year. A very large number of the asset managers that manage the money for New York City retirees, and I'm sure for many of you, BlackRock, State Street, JP Morgan, Vanguard, PIMCO, Goldman Sachs, and other investors have been scared out of, have left Climate Action 100, a coordinated effort of asset owners and asset managers to try to make sure that investors play a critical role in the climate transition. And many of them have taken big steps back from their climate commitments in other ways, for example, voting in favor of many fewer climate action shareholder proposals. So last week, Vanguard announced that even though 3 years ago it supported 46% of climate action shareholder resolutions, anyone notice or want to guess what percent they supported this past proxy season? Zero. And it's not because there weren't high quality resolutions. I'll talk about a couple of them in a minute that we actually brought forward and that some of the largest banks on the planet agreed to. So they were not out of the realm of the possible. And the threat of these attacks is not limited to undoing our efforts to reduce the impact of climate change. These attacks aren't just going after the E in ESG, the environment. The war on ESG is also putting at risk our responsible investing work to prevent exploitation of workers, of tenants, of others in the supply chains of the companies that we invest in, and even to ensure strong corporate governance policies. Let's remember the G in ESG is just for good corporate governance, shareholders paying attention to make sure that the companies we invest in have good governance policies in place. But all of that is at risk from these attacks. And in fact, this war on ESG is coordinated with many right-wing attacks on the whole idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, of making sure that we build an economy